Former U.S. government official UFO UAP investigator Lou Elizondo has recently come out, did an interview with Ross Coulthard on NewsNation, which I broke down in my last video. The other big interview he did just around the same time, this past few days, the past week, was on the Joe Rogan podcast. Obviously, probably know Joe Rogan podcast, massive podcast, probably like the biggest, most, if not the most, one of the top biggest influence podcasts on, the mass media scale. So it's pretty significant that Elizondo would go on Rogan and talk about the claims that he's coming out with about what he encountered working inside the U.S. government, officially tasked with investigating UFO and UAP. So if you didn't see the previous video, it's worth checking out. I give some context about who Elizondo exactly is, and then we break down his NewsNation interview and read between the lines and kind of contrast it with other information that's out there about the things that he's talking about and just the bigger picture. So we're going to do the same thing here with the Joe Rogan interview. So let's dive right into it. And real quick, if you don't know, Lou Elizondo, he claims and basically was, the Pentagon is still denying that he did this, which is crazy, because you had the senator who funded the program wrote a letter in 2021 saying Elizondo did work there and did have the role he said he did. Elizondo went through the whole process for his book and the release of his information through the Pentagon, and they let him say what he said so far. And he's also dropped names of like James Lukatsky, who was the director of OSAP, which no one has contested. That's the official UFO study group that ran from 2008 2010. So the Pentagon still technically denied. So I can't just actually say with full confidence, Lou Elizondo was the director of ATIP, but that's what he is claiming that he did, and it seems to be basically definitely true. But the Pentagon's still denying it, and so he had this kind of firsthand experience being tasked in an official federal government role to, hey, look into, investigate these UFOs, UAPs, and find out what's going on, right? Just like Grush with the UAP task force. So we get his perspective, and he worked there for 10 years. So he goes on Rogan, and we are going to be playing little parts of clips here, and then commenting on and just kind of analyzing a little bit about what we're seeing. So let's just go one clip at a time here from the Rogan interview. Now you can go watch this on YouTube. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes. I was driving down the coast of Nova Scotia actually on a trip recently, and so I had the opportunity to listen to the Rogan interview and the NewsNation interview back to back, and kind of take notes on my phone there. So here we go. Let's check it out.
This country, they're familiar with the 3 videos, right? That have been famously released by the Pentagon.
The Go Fast,
Gimbal, FLIR, correct.
Right.
But those are the least compelling of all the videos that the government has. Those were unclassified. And so those were kind of the low-hanging fruit that could be released to the general public. There's stuff out there that's like 4K ultra high definition, right? So when you see something like that from a certain military platform or a certain military equity or an intelligence collection platform, you have to look at that and say, well, what is that? What the hell is that? And more importantly, that data is being backed up by radar data, right? So you've got electro-optical data like gun camera footage or pod or FLIR video, and then you've got radar data that is actually confirming what the video is picking up. And then you've got eyewitnesses that are also watching it, right? So you've got trained observers, pilots that can recognize the silhouette between an Su-22 and a MiG-25.
Yeah, so I think that this is really important, and one of the key things from Elizondo that we get from him in trying to put this whole puzzle together for ourselves, right, is like he said this before too. We've heard about the 23-minute video and so forth. He's saying it here, and he says in an interview, there are hundreds and hundreds of videos right? We know of the three. If you've been following this, right, you can go look at them if you haven't. The Gimbal, Gimbal, the Go Fast, and the FLIR, the Tic Tac video. So, and those are pretty compelling in their own. They've been tried to be debunked, which then we've had official, government and military people debunk the debunkers on them, and one of them just looks like a freaking flying saucer, right? But anyway, those videos Lou is saying here, they're at the bottom of the barrel. And that's what push this whole thing forward in 2017, right? With the article and then the videos. Plus, you have a whole bunch of details about that, right? The other point he's making here is not only do you have the videos, and they talked about this, the government themselves, the UAP task force in 2022, in that hearing, first 50 hearing on UAP UFOs in 50 years in 2022, they said it themselves. We have hundreds of cases where there are multiple sensors, meaning you have eyewitnesses, multiple, more than one, seeing the same thing. And then you have like radar picking up exactly how and where and when and how they said it moved. And then even more data, whatever else it would be, sensors and so forth. And like he just said, they have 4K videos, right? So, and this is what's still classified. So when the Pentagon and Arrow is sitting there telling the public and Congress, we have no evidence of it, we just can't explain it yet. Sure, if you have a 4K video of like a disc-shaped aircraft coming down, hovering, turning on a dime, and you can see it in clear daylight, sure, you can just keep telling Congress and the American people that it's unexplained, right? That's like the perfect jargon to just keep saying, but like, all right, but like, what is it? Um, if it's officially not U.S. government, and if it is U.S. government or U.S. military craft or in other countries, then what laws of physics and engineering have been broken and are unknown to the world and to the public, right? So a very key point there that he makes early on there, which I think is really important. And Christopher Mellon has advocated for releasing these videos because those are the kind of things that can convince the public, keep the ball rolling. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand has spoken about having a hearing allegedly this fall where she wants to show the public a video of something that can be explained and then one that can't be explained. What will that look like? Will that just be a propaganda show? But here he is, the guy that worked 10 years looking at this stuff, saying these videos are in 4K quality and are very compelling, way more than the ones we have seen. So what are they hiding, right? What are they hiding? Now we're going to move forward here to the next clip, and then we'll talk about it. Here we go.
Some cases, literally these UAP splitting a combat formation. Now, if you know how planes fly, they fly very close in a combat situation. These things were splitting the formation, right? That there were reports being provided through the Air Force, mostly through the Navy, about air safety issues.
So I'm just going to pause there, real quick comment, right? But I think it's significant if you've studied the greater UFO literature and lore and all the claims over, decades and decades of this going on, is that, like he says there are reports of these objects breaking up formations, like he said there, seeming to kind of like play with or almost, not attack or be aggressive, but be like, engaging in a kind of way like that with the military. But if you caught the little comment he said, there's these reports came through, he says, mostly through the Navy. And one thing I've seen, having studied the UFO literature for regularly and pretty deeply now for about three years or so, a theme that I've condensed out is there is this idea, this notion that the Navy has been like pro disclosure, and that people within the Navy, although they're still, bad and good guys, to put it one way, in a more general sense, the Navy has been more of where like the so-called good guys are, and like the Air Force have been where more of like the bad guys have been, and like working with the CIA and being part of the UFO secrecy. A lot of people claiming that when the Air Force was created in 1947, along with the CIA and the NSA and the National Security Act of 1947, that kind of broke off, and the Air Force was the first group tasked with officially handling the UFO issue. So the theory is that the Air Force has kind of always been the ones covering it up and having some kind of control over it, whereas the Navy, while I'm sure that they're not innocent of misdeeds and corruption and so forth, has been more pro disclosure about UFOs. And it's an interesting idea. And you see some of the figures and the testimonies, and it starts to present itself as a little bit of a picture of a possibility. You have the stories of James Forrestal, who was the first Secretary of Defense of the United States when the Department of Defense was also created in the 1947 National Security Act, and he was assassinated. That's not the official story. The official story is that he jumped out of the top floor of the Navy hospital, Bethesda Naval Hospital, as well. He was being hospitalized there for mental illness in 1949, right? But you can read some books now, and there were some declassified documents that came out in recent years that basically show they definitely covered up whatever really happened to him. And there was broken glass in his room. He didn't just jump out the window and try to hang himself, which is what the official story is. And so there are different theories as to why he was killed. One that's popular in UFO literature that originates from the Majestic documents, the MJ-12 documents, which is contested of, how much of them are authentic versus not. But it seems that even Ross Coulthart recently had an intelligence official on from Australia who was arguing that his research into the National Archive shows that the Majestic documents are largely authentic. Anyway, they claim that they killed Forrestal because Forrestal was allegedly about to tell the American people about what was going on in 1949, a couple of years after Roswell. Allegedly, he was going to spill the beans to the public. Allegedly, John F. Kennedy, President Kennedy, was going to in 63. That was part of the reason why he was killed. But in any event, you have this story that the Navy has been wanting to bring this out to the public. And if that's true, I mean, there are dots that connect that narrative. For example, if you listen actually to the David Grush interview on Joe Rogan, which is a really interesting interview from last year, which I actually have a whole page of notes on. I'm going to make that video at some point soon, because there's a lot of stuff to read between the lines on what Grush opens up on the Rogan interview more than anywhere else, more than his testimony under Congress, more than his interview with Ross Coulthart. He's kind of has guard down more, and he gives you more nuance and detail. And part of his story is that when he started working as the investigator for the UAP task force, the first people that started coming to him and telling him what was going on were Navy admirals, high-ranking Navy people. So it's interesting, right? And he even said one of these Navy officials, if the public would know their name, if he were able to say it. He said that in the Rogan interview. And then you look at who were the two pilots that were on testimony on Congress last year. David Fravor and Ryan Graves, both Navy pilots, right? Now you hear Elizondo saying most of these reports that were getting passed through about seeing and encountering UFOs were coming from the Navy, not the Air Force, not other departments and branches. So it makes you think maybe there's something to that. So yeah, we kind of went on a little bit of a dive there with that. Wow, let's move along here because there's just so much more. Next, we'll listen to this part. Okay, let's check this out.
Yeah, but it was silver metallic and like a diamond, maybe. That's a better way to describe it. Like a diamond almost. And it looked kind of like it looked kind of like that. Really, it's just a little.
And that
Yeah. So just a interesting note. He speaks about seeing a wedge-shaped kind of diamond-shaped craft, and that's interesting in connection with some of the claims about potential man-made UFOs. People talk about the TR-3B, as it's called, this triangular craft, which apparently was seen a lot through the decades, 70s, 80s, 90s, and on. Still to this day, apparently the triangles are seen a lot by a lot of people. And there are claims that these were made by the Air Force, or rather used by the Air Force, made by these private companies like Lockheed Martin and so forth. So it's interesting there as well, right? A little connection into that as well. Let's move along here and listen to the next clip.
Broadly speaking, the only two countries in the world may have a chance of doing something like that would be Russia and China. And now in 1950, where was China? It was in the middle of a famine at the time, and where was Russia? Russia was trying to develop the atomic bomb and still was using horse-drawn carts.
Now, this is because they start to talk about the older stuff like the late 40s and early 50s, right? And this is, if we're going to really study this history and this topic, like, you got to look at those early waves of sightings and be like, what was going on there? Like, was it really just all aliens? Was it really just all people hallucinating? Well, we know that we can be pretty much positive that it wasn't that. The top Air Force general tasked with studying this in 47, General Nathan Twining, wrote a memo which became declassified decades later that said they're not fictitious or visionary. They're real. They're disc-shaped, flat on the bottom, domed on the top. Okay, so they knew that in 47. They knew that these flying saucers were flying around, man, and sometimes like they were seeing tons of them. This isn't just like fiction, right? This stuff was happening the late 1940s through the 1950s and has been ongoing. Now, an interesting thread to this whole thing, which is largely dismissed. It's either dismissed or it's like just believed in and like blindly without trying to study it, is the idea that certain Nazi German scientists may have developed some kind of flying saucer. And I think it's something worth keeping on the table, right? And Lou, and Rogan are talking about here, like, nobody else could have had these in 1950, so they had to be aliens, right, or something else. I don't know though. I don't know. And you can go down that rabbit hole if you want, for sure. It's, fair warning. It's very tangled web, and you have to really use your best critical thinking skills to not get just convinced that like it's all BS, or not get convinced that like it's real and that there's like that it's definitely true, right? My study of it is somewhere in the middle, and I think it's worth thinking about. You do have to remember that the Nazis scientists were way more advanced in aerospace and aeronautic technology and engineering than anyone else in the world during World War II in the early 1940s. So, they made the first jet. They had the best jet. They had a bunch of other technological breakthroughs. Look, it was a Nazi scientist that came to the U.S. and ran the rocket programs through Operation Paperclip, right? So they were clearly more advanced. So if there was a country, as Lou puts it, that could have had some type of crazy anti-gravity or some other exotic propulsion disc-shaped craft, it could have been a remnant of Nazi Germany or Nazi scientists working for some other country and starting to experiment with these things. Look, I'm not saying that that's what happened, but there's reason to keep that on the table and not just say, okay, these flying discs were seen in 47 and 50 and 52. Therefore, no human could have had them. Well, that's not necessarily true. You look at the work of T. Townsend Brown in the 20s. And he had, was demonstrating the possibility of having flying saucers. Edward Teller, the hydrogen father of the hydrogen bomb, as it's called, witnessed it and said, like, it looks like a flying saucer, so who knows what the deeper layer of the secrecy is. And I think we got to be careful of just dismissing stuff because not as many people are saying it, or we're not being told that by government officials. Look, they don't know everything either. So interesting point, interesting thread there. Let's keep it moving forward. Oh, and actually connected to that is going to be this next clip. All right. Connected to this whole the Nazi flying saucer thread is this next clip, which is also, I think, worth keeping in mind.
In fact, when I was in the Patagonia area of Argentina, there is a near town called Bariloche and Las Lajas. One of the chief of police was telling me there's an area there called La Miranda. La Miranda means to see, to view. And they call it that, the town, and because UAP are so frequent there, that local law enforcement actually built an observatory, an observation post to look at these things because they were so frequent.
And I just mentioned that in connection because we know for a fact that a lot of former high-ranking Nazis escaped to Argentina. Argentina was very welcoming of the Nazis, was very Nazi sympathetic to the Nazis. We know that the two U-boat submarines showed up in Argentina in the summer of 1945, which spiraled into a lot of the conspiracy theories that some remnant of Nazi Germany escaped and kind of carried on clandestinely in Argentina and even Antarctica. So I just think it's interesting that, Argentina has these kind of hotspots and, is there a connection there? Is there a connection? It's something to keep in mind. Moving along, he starts to talk about the USO sightings. So let's take a listen here.
An object that, do you know how large an offshore oil derrick is? They're huge, right?
Yeah.
They're almost like a small city, right? They're like one city block. They're huge. They're enormous things. There is a video that shows one of these objects underwater that goes by. The speed was calculated between 450 and 550 knots underwater, and it was bigger than the offshore derrick that it was passing, because you could see in the video the offshore derrick and you could see this thing zip right by it.
So pretty interesting stuff, right? Is that that's part of what he's allowed to talk about here. Apparently, is like there's these huge USOs, right? UFOs, underwater, unidentified submerged objects, as they call them, on camera and radar, just baffling people. Like, what is this object that is controlled by something? And this is a whole other thing, right? And I think the ocean thing is going to be important. And they get to this. Actually, let's jump to that clip. Actually, I'm going to go right into that so we can talk about this all at once. All right, here's the next one. Moving on about the ocean thread and the USO thread.
But these things could also be from under the water. These things could be something that is as natural to Earth as the little beasties were, right, when we first discovered them. Maybe they've been here all along. Right.
So the ocean is largely undiscovered. One of the things that people need to understand is that most of the exploration of the ocean is really essentially around the outside edges.
That's right.
It's around the shores.
Less than 10%. So,
which is nuts.
A buddy of mine,
90% of the ocean.
That's right.
Like what?
We know more about the moon than the bottom of our own ocean.
So yeah, this is really important, I think, to keep in mind, and it's something that's becoming more popular to be talked about in the UFO thread. Is, yeah, I mean, look, 90% of the ocean is just completely untouched, unknown. And not only that, for example, and you can listen to the scientist, Kevin Knuth, Knuth. He has worked, he works for some type of UAP research group that has worked with the government in some capacity. He's like a former NASA scientist. and heard him talk about it very eloquently once. How he was saying, if you were a intelligent, let's say, technological civilization moving through the galaxy or the solar system or whatever, stationing or establishing, bases in the ocean would make a lot of sense, because water, we know, is only going to be, right? Because once you get too cold, water becomes ice. Once you get too hot, it becomes it boils and vaporizes, right? So there is a range of temperature from freezing to the boiling point of water, that water has to be in that temperature, and it's just going to be H2O, right? Hydrogen and oxygen. So it's very stable, it's very predictable. One of the hardest things, if you hypothesize about what it would be like to use technology and craft to go to different planets and different parts of the solar system, the galaxy, the universe, is like the atmosphere of a planet could be just insane. I mean, we're talking like thousands and thousands or millions of degrees hot or cold. Um, who knows what else kind of chemical makeup of the atmosphere, winds, what else, whatever you want it to be, right? Gases, dust, but water's water, right? And so it would make a lot of sense that these potentially advanced civilizations and their technology, their craft would have a basis in the ocean, in the deep oceans. And look, yeah, most of the planet is ocean, and it would keep them out of the way of humans, because we are not anywhere near the deep ocean and the open ocean. We are on land and by the coasts, right? And look at all the stuff that's happened on the coast. The USO thing, I think the writing's on the wall. That is going to be a key part of early disclosure and potentially of the bigger story about this whole thing. I think I'm seeing some signs of that. If you listen to and I actually want to do a whole video of this, so I'm going to save most of that information for that, but I'll comment on it briefly here. If you looked at the last episode of George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell's podcast, it's very clear that George Knapp's upcoming information, which he says is going to move the needle and is going to be, very significant, has to do with USOs. If you listen to what Anna Paulina Luna, the co-chair of the UAP caucus in Congress, has said, that the next hearing, she thinks they will focus on USOs. Okay. Then you have UFO bigwig Richard Dolan, who has been saying now for a while, the last year, that his next book is a detailed, in-depth study about USOs. It was supposed to come out this summer. Summer's almost over. I speculate that Richard Dolan is connected enough to those in the UFO world that may have, rubbings with whatever kind of network may be going on inside the government, and is maybe working towards some kind of planned disclosure. I don't know, Carl Nell and the Soul Foundation and whatnot. Dolan is clearly like a key resource. And so I don't know. I see a little bit of something bubbling in that George Knapp is working on some type of USO thing that's supposedly going to really move the needle. Allegedly, one of the hearings that's going to come, we haven't had a hearing in over a year now, is going to focus on USOs. And then Richard Dolan's book is still not out, right? Is he timing it to come out during the hearings, to come out during George Knapp's thing? And now you hear Lou Elizondo, and part of his story is the importance of the USOs, the underwater stuff. And not to mention, I know through a friend of mine, and someone that I'm currently writing a book with, who was one of the speakers at the Contact in the Desert UFO conference, which was in June, I believe, of this year. And he saw George Knapp, and George Knapp was with Lou Elizondo. He said the whole weekend they were together, and that George Knapp had told him, "Hey, you got to come out to wherever he's in. He's in like Las Vegas or the Southwest." He said, "You got to come out here and see what we're doing, see what's going on." And he was invited to go. he didn't go, but I thought that was interesting. I thought it's interesting that Knapp and Elizondo were together the whole time. So clearly there's something with the USOs going on. And here's my own speculation, and I'm probably going to elaborate on this. I've already talked about it quite a bit here. Maybe I won't make the full video dedicated to it, but I think that would be, let's say that there is a sort of coordinated, controlled disclosure, as has been put forth by the Soul Group, for example, the Soul Foundation. And let's say that despite, what the Pentagon's doing, despite whatever group is keeping the cover up on this going, they're still like, all right, well, we're going to move forward as best we can. I personally really do think it makes sense to disclose to the public first that these NHI and their technology are coming from the deep oceans, right? Because it's very much less threatening, I think, right? We're very much more, if you were to go right now and be like, hey, so, announce to the world, the president, right? Like, there's aliens and spaceships and they are, all over our skies and they're coming from other planets. People are going to go outside and be scared, a good percentage of people. But if you say, yeah, they're deep in the oceans, in the 90% of what we've never even touched, it's more distant from you. It's like, wow, that's crazy. But like, okay, they're way out there, like in a place we know more about the moon than we do about the deep ocean. So like, they're very far removed from our day-to-day life. They're not like in the air, like coming down from space. So I think like the focusing on the USO would make sense if there was some type of coordinated effort to try to roll this out to the public in the most digestible way. Just a speculation of mine, based on what I'm seeing. Now, let's go jump real quick to the next thing. And you may have heard of this before. I have heard of this. This isn't new information. Maybe in his book, he gives more detail. He talks about this island-sized USO that he witnessed. Well, we'll just watch a short section of him talking about it here.
And as they're about to grab this cruise missile out of the ocean, there's something huge and round, and what was described to me as black as a devil, starts to rise to the surface. The water begins to churn, very much like David Fravor's description of the Tic Tac incident and the roiling water. The frogman is so freaked out, he's literally trying to climb the line back up. He's like total panic at the disco, right? And the helicopter's like, do we do like an emergency ascent? What the hell's going on here? And right as this thing is about, and by the way, it's the size of a small island and round. Right as this thing is about to break the surface, it sucks the missile down and disappears.
Jesus
and that
Christ.
was
Yeah, so it's a pretty wild story, right? They were basically testing missiles out in the ocean, and then someone will go, a helicopter and a operative would go and retrieve the missile back. And when they went to go retrieve it, this huge black island-sized object craft came up, sucked the missile down, and went back down. Like that's pretty wild, right? And you wonder, what that is and what's going on there, and is that aggressive, right? Is that a threat? Is that just like, I don't know what that is. We could speculate on what the communication is there, but a pretty interesting, right? A very interesting, and that leads us to think. And I'll jump to the next clip now. This whole concept, which I think it's important, what Elizondo's communicating here, as this process of disclosure kind of unfolds, is like, is it going to be pumped as fear and threat? And although Elizondo, in my judgment, hasn't like completely been like, okay, I'm going to pump the fear and threat narrative, he also has made it clear that he sees zero evidence that there's any benevolence to this phenomenon, which I don't know if that's accurate, but let's take a quick listen.
right. I would look at this from the perspective of there's three options. They're good, they're neutral, or they're bad. So let's go down this road for a second. Let's say they're good, right? Well, we got nothing to worry about. The problem is there's nothing to suggest that they truly are benevolent. People say, well, they're like, they don't want us to nuke ourselves. Well, I discuss it in what I wrote, that there's no There's no data to suggest that. They didn't stop us from dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and vaporizing 500,000 living souls. They didn't stop us when we started developing nuclear weapons from the atomic age. They didn't stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. They didn't stop the testing in the Nevada range of atomic and nuclear weapons. And now, how many countries have atomic weapons and nuclear weapons? A lot, right? They didn't stop Chernobyl. They didn't stop Fukushima. They didn't stop 3 Mile Island. So to say that they're here to help us, I'm not sure there's data. People say, well, in Minot and in North Dakota and Montana, the UFOs came in and they interfered with our nuclear weapons and they brought the entire Echo flight offline. Which, by the way, I have the government report on that if you want it.
Yeah, so he goes on and talks about that. Now, look, we could talk about this for a long time, the discussion of do they have a benevolent nature or not. There's just so much you could break down about that. And, I think what Lou is saying is accurate. However, where I would disagree with him is, well, number one, there are cases of there's enough out there, maybe not, radar tracked incidents and military reports necessarily that are evidence of benevolence. I'd have to look back at that. But I do know, for example, like the incident in Africa, the Ariel school, right, where a bunch of students reported seeing this craft land and these beings coming out. And, the Harvard psychologist John Mack went there and interviewed all of the children right away and deduced that they were all telling the truth about what they saw. Seems like something really happened there, and that the message that they had was quite positive and benevolent there. You also have a lot of other cases where that has been communicated through experiencers, right? We also have to remember that you can't just reduce things to like, are they benevolent or not, right? Like, look, are humans benevolent? Sure, there's nice humans and there's humans that have done nice things, but there's humans that have done horrible things. And look, I'm a history teacher of 10 years here, and I continue to study history and learn more and more about it, which I work with my students both at the college and the high school level. I mean, it's ugly, man. You don't have to take my word for it. Go study history yourself. Humans have done a bunch of horrible, nasty, cruel things to each other, to ourselves. So we're a threat to ourselves. I think so. And if these things have been being seen since the 40s and even earlier, as some report, and yeah, I know this isn't bulletproof logic, but people say they would have done something already, and that's a fair assumption. Yes, you could rebut that and say that's not necessarily true. Maybe they're waiting. Maybe there's another reason that they would take violence out on us or something. But this technology is so advanced. They could do whatever they want to us. Maybe they are already in a covert manner. But my whole thing is like, all of this is possible. But again, look at how many different types of groups of human beings there are on planet Earth. So I think the most logical thing is that, assuming there really are these intelligent beings that are existing and interacting with our world, it's would be very plausible that there would be many different groups. Maybe there are some groups that are malevolent. Maybe there are some groups that do kind of menacing things to humans. Maybe there's some groups that are nice. Maybe there's some groups that just want us to make a better world. But the even bigger thing from this, right, is he's trying to say like, oh, they never stopped us from developing nuclear weapons. They never stopped us from, screwing up and causing violence and damage. Well, I mean, that's a lot to expect from a group to like intervene and be like our saviors, right? That's what we're gauging on if they're benevolent or not. I mean, do we like, as humans on less intelligent beings, do we like jump in and stop cheetahs from attacking wildebeest, or I don't know, I'm just picking examples out of my head. Do we stop in and stop the animal world from operating the way that it does? No. Do we try to do some of us try to help the environment and like preserve extinct species and stuff, yes, but we're not like stopping animals from doing harm to each other. Okay, so I don't think that that's a really strong logical argument that he's making. Now we're gonna move on to the next part here as we wrap up here, and it's this idea about, are there already aliens among us? And let's hear what Elizondo has to say about that idea.
To this day, even in China, when we go into a zoo, right, and we have the panda bear exhibits, what do? We so we don't disrupt the pandas. We wear panda suits. Now it sounds silly, but you can actually get online and see zookeepers wearing panda suits because they don't want to they want to interfere as least as possible with the natural flora and fauna there inside the exhibit.
Do
right?
you think
Plants and
then
animals.
was it reasonable to theorize that there's aliens amongst us?
When you say, well, two things. So I don't want to be evasive. But I also want to be very specific. When we say aliens, and then we also are we saying something from another planet, or are we simply saying non-human?
Non-human intelligence that looks like us, that moves around with us?
What a beast!
So is it possible? Well, we're doing it already with the panda bear. So it's not that we do
Seems like
it all
a
the
strategy that'd be very simple.
time. Sure, and especially if you have the technology.
So pretty interesting, and it's of course one of the interesting things to think about is, okay, we've heard people like Carl Nell say that non-human intelligence is here, has been interacting with humans for a long time, and people in the government know about it. We've heard David Grush say craft and bodies have been recovered. Now we're hearing Elizondo saying that, private companies have crashed UFOs. Departments of the government have had biological samples. There's been implants inside of people. Okay, so we inch closer and closer to potentially this reality that, like, yeah, these aliens are here. And this question of like, are they so advanced like we are, to make up a panda suit and go make pandas think that we're pandas so that they behave a certain way? Is that possible, that aliens, non-human intelligence, would do that with the human appearance? That's certainly something that's been claimed in a lot of the books and the claims in the UFO lore and literature. And here's Elizondo saying that it's possible, it's plausible, that it would make sense. And so, just contrast that with everything else you might hear out there: hybridization programs, shape-shifting claims that we've seen. Wow, will we find out one day that this is going on? Perhaps. Perhaps it's just like, how are we really ever going to get to the point of knowing that? And if it is going on, it would be in the interest of whoever is disguising as humans, whatever their intentions and agenda may be, that we don't find that out for sure. So, look, this was like my highlights from the 2-hour or so Rogan interview with Elizondo. And, I think that it's pretty important. And I just want to comment in closing here about what he is really revealing. And I think one thing that's you have to catch it's very subtle, because a lot of people might just be like, Lou Elizondo is just trying to promote his book, right? He's just another guy trying to make money off of UFO stories. And he had a government position, so he's trying to cash in on that. And again, I'll leave that on the table because I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine as what's really going on behind the scenes. But it is worth noting that in the Rogan interview, where he has this huge, massive audience, that if he just dropped, "Hey, my book name is Imminent by Lou Elizondo, it's on Amazon," he could probably make a lot of money by just saying that on the Rogan interview. He doesn't say that once. And in fact, when the one time he refers to his book, he says, "I wrote something recently that I had to get approved by the Pentagon." And then at another point he says, like, he's talking about a specific case, and he's like, I mentioned this in the thing I wrote. He doesn't mention the book Imminent. So I think that's an important data point to keep in mind if you're gonna try to evaluate like what are Elizondo's intentions? Is it to make money for his book? Well, he clearly chose not to mention the name of his book. Maybe he's doing that. Maybe he did that intentionally to kind of avoid being ridiculed for that, or maybe he just really is just trying to put this information out. I don't know. Let me know what you think. That's pretty much it. I mean, there was another part in there where they talk about the consciousness aspect of the UFOs, and they talk about how they are very plausible that they're controlled by thought. So why don't we actually just play that since we made it this far, and then that's going to wrap it up for us here. Let's check it out. I believe it's this one here.
All these things seem to operate through the being itself, had some sort of connection to the craft, some sort of strange way of interfacing with the craft that didn't have anything to do with pulling levers and moving
Sure.
things.
But Joe, is that really that much of a stretch? Let's look at this. We've done experiments where we've had pilots be able to control aircraft thousands of miles away with a helmet that interprets thought.
Right.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think it's also of note that they're talking about this, and Elizondo's saying this is plausible because if you go back to 1996 with Philip Corso, who was a lieutenant colonel and headed something called the Foreign Technology Desk at the Pentagon, he wrote a book back in 96, 97 called The Day After Roswell. And he was claiming back then, I mean, what's it, like 20 years ago now, that they recovered crafts from Roswell and elsewhere, or at least he saw it was from Roswell. And they deduced that the pilots, whatever they were using some type of headband that was decoding electrical signals from the brain and flying the craft. And it sounds like so science fiction, right? And like such a tinfoil hat thing, right? But like, think about it, right? Do you think that if we continue to exist for hundreds and thousands and more years from our current civilization, do you really think we're still going to be like flying airplanes where you have to like pull all these complicated levers and push all these buttons, right? No, if we really kept advancing, of course, that would be the ideal thing. And according to Elizondo, we're already experimenting with that. Apparently, have successfully experimented with it. Like, no, if you're flying a craft, right, wouldn't you rather just be able to think, go up, go down, stop, hover, turn left, accelerate, right? Obviously, that would be so much better and have no buttons and levers. And certainly a lot of these reports of alleged people who've seen the insides of these UFOs, a lot of times there's no components, levers, switches, knobs, and that puzzled them apparently early on. And that's why this was deduced as they're controlled through some type of mental ability. And that's just pretty fascinating, I think. And it's good. So it's like there's pros and cons to, I think, the information that Lou Elizondo's come forward with. I think it's mostly pros, actually, in my opinion. There's just some of the things I've highlighted in this video and the last one that I think are worth keeping an eye on to see if, whether he's doing it at all, unknowingly being used or not. Who knows? I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's just coming forward and trying to be someone who brings truth forward for human beings and the public. But I think that we should read between the lines and consider all of this and just keep an open mind to it all. I think it's possible that the powers that be, who pump us with fear with everything else, could try to manipulate things, and I'll say, okay, finally, we're going to have to let this secret out, but how can we use it to our advantage? And so that's why I think it's important to analyze what these type of information that's coming out, specifically here, Lou Elizondo's interviews, his book, and it's very interesting. And so that's going to be the analysis there of the Rogan interview. You can go watch the whole thing, check it out for yourself. Thank you for watching Expanded Knowledge. Again, this is Anthony. Appreciate you. And I will see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.